Welcome to the We Are CC podcast. Thanks for joining us for episode 4, Decentralization or Not. I'm Tom Crown, joined today by the best looking chartist 2022, Mr. Poppy, professional GameStop trader Oz, and Elon Musk's biggest super duper loves Elon fan, Mr. Mister. Poppy, tonight our topic is decentralization, is that right?
Yes, sir, Tom. What is decentralization? Why should I care? I just want to buy some coins on exchange and make some money, right? But this goes to the very heart, the very soul, the very birth of cryptocurrency, which was to decentralize financial services for the common person. Before we get started, we want to pay a special shout out to the Bulls this week. Tom, this was kind of an exciting week after a few months of downtrend, right?
Absolutely. Oh man, thank God the Bulls came back. I'd like to see a little more follow through here into the next week, but it has been a long, painful, I can't even remember, 2-3 months now. So yeah, shout out to the Bulls. Good job, everybody.
Yeah, it has been. I think it was before Thanksgiving here in the U.S. I love this week, but please, if you're out there and you got about $1 billion in your wallet, please go hit the buy button. I'll be very happy. Yeah.
Market order, please.
So this week, and this kind of came up for various reasons, right? We've talked about decentralization a little bit in some of the earlier podcasts, but I don't feel like we've given it enough attention, not nearly enough to what it deserves, not as much as if Satoshi was here listening in. And if you are, sir, please hit me up. We'd love to have you on. Not as much as he would like to hear about, because really at the end of the day, that's what this is all about. It's not necessarily about the money. It's about the decentralization and the history of decentralization. So we're going to talk about that. We'll talk about why it matters in 2022 and maybe why it doesn't always matter as much as we would like it to. That's going to be an interesting debate. So to frame decentralization, let's just outline a few things first for everyone on the call so we can agree to that much. I would say two of the fathers of decentralization, definitely Satoshi, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We did talk about in the last call. But also Vitalik. And a lot of people out there may not know Vitalik Buterin, and I apologize if I said that wrong, but he's the father of Ethereum. And if you have Bitcoin as the granddad of crypto, Ethereum certainly the second biggest project, second biggest protocol within the space, and arguably the second most important. The way he framed decentralization, he called it a trilemma, meaning there's three aspects to a blockchain that designers must contend with to achieve a decentralized apparatus. So first, obviously, is the decentralization. And that's to create a blockchain system that doesn't rely on just one point of control. For example, if I'm Amazon and you're logging on to Amazon.com, you're almost certainly logging on to Amazon servers hosted somewhere in the country that you live in, somewhere nearby, right? That's a single corporate entity that controls all of that. They control the servers, they control who accesses it. Decentralizing that means many servers all over the world. In the case of Bitcoin, if you're mining Bitcoin, you are part of that decentralized blockchain service. You are helping to process transactions on Bitcoin. Second is scalable. So that is the ability for a blockchain system to handle more and more and more transactions, which we saw painfully over the past year. So through 2021, when we saw the NFT, we'll call it the NFT revolution, when Ethereum blew up because everyone wanted to buy Bored Ape Yacht Club. They wanted to buy CryptoPunks. They wanted to buy all kinds of fun stuff, right? But what that did was put a stress on Ethereum that had never been there. And we realized there's some pain points, that Ethereum isn't as scalable as we want it to be yet. The third point is security. So that's the ability of a blockchain system to operate and to defend itself from attacks, from bugs, from any unforeseen issues, from hacks. This is a big deal because if you're talking about financial set of services, the number one most important thing is obviously security. I don't want to lose my money. I know you guys don't want to lose your money. Oz, could you give me a few examples of maybe what a centralized crypto service would be?
So centralized crypto service would be something like Coinbase, Crypto.com, OpenSea, where the things they offer are on the blockchain, and they're kind of like the bridge between Web 2 and Web 3 in that sense, where they link to a decentralized platform, but they themselves are not decentralized. They're a company and they have offices with people in it and kind of like a corporation.
Hmm. Yeah, and for example, so something like Coinbase, because it's centralized, that also means, if I have an issue, I could contact the Coinbase help desk, right?
Yeah, well, that's the whole idea pretty much around it is that they're a lot more centralized, that I have support systems and emails and even CEOs on Twitter that you can talk to if you ever run into a problem. So in theory, it should be a lot easier to sort out problems if problems were to occur.
Hmm. But then we also have decentralized counterparts to these kind of services. And what would be a few of those for the people listening that maybe they aren't familiar? Maybe they haven't. A lot of people may have only transacted on, say, Coinbase or Binance. Maybe they've never tried out a decentralized service. So what are a few of those?
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of people haven't used decentralized platforms currently because they're not the most popular. Coinbase and Binance is like, I think they'd be in the top 10 search results when you search into how to buy crypto. A decentralized crypto service would be something like Uniswap, Trader Joe, or Shiba Swap. And the difference mainly would be that they don't have like an office. They do have employees that work for them, but they're more like developers and people that build upon the chain rather than, the standard people in shirt and tie in an office in like in New York or something, for example. So the problem with that is that you can't actually contact anyone if something goes wrong. If something goes wrong on a centralized platform, you can ask them. You can be like, hey guys, what's happened here? Maybe you can help me out. Whereas on a decentralized platform, it's a little bit harder to get help.
So when you talk about a centralized service, you're going to have a corporate entity. You're going to have a office, like you said. You're going to have, teams of employees that support different functions within that, including probably a help desk if you have questions. And on the decentralized side, you will have teams of people that work for that. Obviously, someone has to build the apps that you're using, like Uniswap, right? Uniswap has to have developers, and they can have support teams. They can have a lot of things, but this is more of a decentralized team. So the fun thing in crypto is that a lot of these decentralized crypto services, the teams are all over the world. And a lot of them are actually anonymous. That's also the very interesting thing, right? When you talk about a corporate entity, I can't think of a single corporation that's run by an anonymous person. But in crypto, some of the biggest projects in crypto are run by completely anonymous teams, meaning you have no idea who that person is beyond their profile picture and their name. It actually it was kind of big news this week. They were talking about a news company, I forget which one now, but they had doxed the creators or the founders of Bored Ape Yacht Club. And some people were up in arms about that because one of the things that we take pride in within the crypto space is that ability to operate anonymously. And that's not always a bad thing because being anonymous doesn't necessarily mean you're a bad person. Maybe your government isn't a big fan of crypto. Maybe your job, maybe your company that you work for in the daytime has some sort of policy against it. There could be a lot of reasons. Now we want to talk about when we kick this, I want to talk about the benefits and the drawbacks of each. And so if I could pull Mr. Mister into this, because Mr. Mister, I know that you are big in the DeFi space. What are some advantages of a decentralized, information financial service on the blockchain?
Been thinking a lot about that actually, but really at a high level, it's protection from censorship, right? It's the decentralized nature of these systems prevents it from being blocked or banned or taken down somehow, right? Just look at some of the centralized web services in some of these, you spoke to those oppressive regimes, oppressive governments that don't perhaps like crypto, Poppy. They shut down Twitter all the time, right? They control information in that way. And that's because these are centralized services. There is a headquarters, there is a someone that's controlling a set of web servers that controls the access to the service. When you decentralize a network, you do provide access to anybody at all times. regardless of whether certain bad actors perhaps are not so hot on what you're talking about and they want to shut it down. There's also the potential for data integrity, right? To increase data integrity. And that's just basically fundamental to the way these distributed blockchains, right? These distributed ledgers, rather, these blockchains are built. The important data gets distributed to all these different nodes, these validators, whatever the blockchain calls them, and they all are responsible for maintaining the integrity of that data, right? So if one data source, one node or validator has separate data from 1,000 other validators, then we know that there's something wrong there, that there's something perhaps fraudulent, and that is a built-in error control, right? So it does offer that data integrity. And security, I think, goes hand in hand with censorship protection as well, right? It allows multiple actors to continuously check information, to continuously check transactions, for example, on Ethereum, right? That makes it so you have so many different eyes that are incentivized through rewards to make sure that everything that they're signing off on is accurate. And I think that kind of leads into this ideology that is pretty, foundational to DeFi, certainly to DeFi, to crypto in large part. I wouldn't say in full, but in large part, it does open itself up to this ideology of openness, right? Open source, quote unquote, this transparency, this idea that we're all as a community, a crypto community, a DeFi community, what have you. As a community, we're building these solutions, these decentralized solutions that can help with data censorship or with data integrity, with protecting from censorship, security. And I think therein lies kind of the flag bearer idea for the crypto space in general, right? It's we are open, we are accessible, we are transparent so that anybody can come use the platform regardless of your location or your government or how much money you have. And I think that idea is really cool in terms of this even larger idea of what we're all trying to do here, right? And to a large part, I think a lot of us are here for learning and trying to understand how this new technological paradigm works. But there's also a sense of trying to earn money. There's that. But I think really there's this big idea of being self-sovereign, having your control over your own information, whether that's your identity. We touched on that a little while ago. Or it could certainly be your wealth, right? Your digital assets, really your financial assets. So that I think really just kind of speaks to, I know that that was a lot, but I think that kind of speaks to some of the advantages of decentralization.
You bring up a good point that I think is worth revisiting. You talked about people wanting to make money. Obviously, everyone on the call is probably sitting there thinking, yeah, I love making money. I want to make money. Why does Bitcoin reward us for helping to run the decentralized space? Well, before Bitcoin, there were other attempts at a decentralized kind of apparatus. If you go back into, and there's probably some that precede this, but one of the most popular ones was in the 90s. You had something like Napster, which was a application that was used to share music on the, at the time, fairly primitive internet. That was just dial-up internet. It took, an entire day to download a song, but it was a big deal at the time because that was the first time where people could download music from the internet. Before that, it was cassette tapes, it was CDs, and a lot of music artists and governments were actually tapping a lot of federal investigative powers to try to shut this down. But decentralizing it, meaning all these people all over the world would leave their computer up overnight and share the music that they had on their computer so you could download it. You might download it from, say, 10 different computers. If one of those computers shut down while you were downloading, that's okay. The other 9 continued to share the rest of the files with you, and you downloaded the whole song, and you got the Metallica song the next day and you were happy. But the problem with that is there was no incentive to share that. So as the government started to go after people for doing that because it was a violation of copyright law, and we don't endorse that. We don't want to endorse that. But as there was no incentive to continue sharing files and law enforcement was cracking down on it, of course, eventually the service shut down. But with Bitcoin, Satoshi realized that you had to incentivize people somehow to maintain that decentralized apparatus. So if there wasn't a payment to miners, why would the miners waste all of their money to stand up these servers to help Bitcoin run, right? So that is a very fundamental tenet of crypto, to be rewarded for facilitating it, for supporting it, for allowing the space to thrive and to support other people in the space, right? So yeah, I just wanted to highlight that, because I think that a lot of people don't realize why miners exist and why they're being paid to do what they do, but they play an extremely important role. Without miners, you wouldn't have a blockchain, you wouldn't have a decentralized space. I did want to also revisit something else, and I think, Tom, this is something you and I were talking about maybe earlier in the week, which was another advantage of decentralized services, talking about censorship, not just from governments, but also from corporations, right?
I wanted to build actually on an idea Mr. had brought up about taking control, especially when it comes to fundraising. I think this is a really important protection for people globally. We have a very recent example even, and we're not going to get political here. We're not going to talk anything like that, but we had a GoFundMe shutdown in Canada for a group of peoples, and the fundraising was in support of them. And this is the problem that cryptocurrency, that Bitcoin sought out to solve. There's no central source deciding who or what transactions can be made. It's simply a ledger of transactions.
This idea of incentive structures, why it makes sense to try to decentralize some of these control structures, and what can happen when you go a little bit too far into the centralized realm and you start to perhaps disenfranchise, groups of people. I think there's something powerful there, right? Because there is, I'm just guessing here, but I think that there is an audience out there that is part of the crypto audience that is marginalized. They are on the fringes, right? And that's why, for me at least, personally, I do really abide by that ideology, the decentralized narrative, in being able to make these technologies more accessible, right? In order to bring in these marginalized groups, right? It's a matter of fairness, sure. There's also a question of maybe quote unquote right, and maybe I'll end there, because I think maybe I'm going into a little bit too far into my philosophy 101. Oz, do you have anything on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting. I don't really follow it too much. I mean, I've heard of it in the news, obviously. I think it's interesting the way they could use it. Kind of what decentralization is about. It's about there is no centralized power to tell you what you cannot do, and it's kind of up to you. Once it's set up, it's set up. Unless everybody as a whole decides to turn it off, it pretty much is always going to be running. Which is actually a pretty great thing about decentralization, is that you can pretty much bet on all of these decentralized networks to be running, for most of existence until somebody gains, it's like 51% of the nodes, because a lot of these decentralized platforms.
Well, Bitcoin's proven itself. From a security standpoint, it's been around the longest. It's been secure. Its encryption has not been broken this entire time. So from that perspective, I don't think it can be hacked, but I think certainly there is the potential for this whole decentralized aspect of Bitcoin to backfire, right? Oz touched on the ability for 51% of Bitcoin miners to rally together, come to a consensus with those 51%, and make a decision that can take Bitcoin's development down a different path. And in that way, I think there is a little bit of risk, but what we're seeing is we're seeing big players come in, right? We're seeing big players not only coming in as investors, right? The institutional money that is just basically stacking sats. I mean, they're stacking Bitcoins. We don't even talk about sats for those guys, right? But there are all these institutional players coming into the mining game. What worries me there is just that concentration. The good news, though, is, the narrative until recently has been that it was all very much concentrating the mining, the hash rate, the bulk of it was coming from Asia. So that there was this fear, a little bit of perhaps a malicious fork coming out of Asia. But with the migration that's recently happened, we're seeing a lot of that hash power go to the West. Not to say that it's fully controlled by Western entities, but I think that's a positive sign.
You bringing up a good point, which is a question I'm going to pose to anyone. Can Bitcoin at this stage, can it be hacked? Should I be worried that someone could go into Bitcoin and hack the chain and take my money?
It's an interesting concept. Like, can it be hacked? So this goes back to what all of you were saying is decentralization really has three kind of pillars, and those are trust, scalability, and democracy. And that is the strength, I guess we can say, of proof of work chains is the democracy. So in order to say hack Bitcoin, Mr. Mister put forward an idea of what is called a 51% attack. And that's when more than half the network decides something maliciously, I guess. But if we think about it, it's really similar to saying, I hacked a vote, say I'm president of Brazil, I don't know, random country, and I hacked a vote because I got 51% of the votes. Well, democracy would say I just won, right? Here it would be viewed maybe as a hack, but it's a consensus. And that's what the model's built on. And so, yeah, there is a threat of, certainly it wasn't comfortable to see mining power concentrated in the West or anywhere. I'm not comfortable with it being concentrated in the US. I'd really like it distributed everywhere. But it comes down to kind of a digital democracy in a way. It's miners are supporting the network, and if the majority of those miners decide something is the right path for Bitcoin, then it becomes the right path for Bitcoin. And we do have to kind of just hope they make the right decisions. But, we've had 13 years of history. Bitcoin's moved slow. We were talking about that actually before the show. And part of that is the certainty of blockchain. There is no room for error. There's no room for mistakes. And so these miners supporting the network, they're incentivized to act in their own best interest, of course. And if we can assume, well, if you're a miner, you're likely very invested in Bitcoin, whether that means holding actual Bitcoins or, investing in the hardware. And that can be a whole nother topic of investment, is mining hardware. These people they want it to succeed. And so they're incentivized to make the best decisions for it.
I think the coolest part of this and the coolest part of Bitcoin, you're right. It's been 13 years that Bitcoin has existed and has continued to operate decentralized. Can you think of anything else so far in history that has transacted billions of dollars without a single centralized kind of entity? I can't think of any. I don't think it's ever happened, right?
Literally nothing. Even if you discount billions of dollars, just nothing operates in the same fashion. And it's extremely unique, I would say, to proof of work chains, but I'd like, Bitcoin, best example. Nothing. It's truly unique. It's maybe, I think it's arguably the truest democracy that exists. You don't have to be anywhere geolocation wise. There is the barrier of hardware and mining, of course, and that now is a big barrier. At one point it wasn't. At one point Bitcoin, the whole network was operated off laptops and home computers, and that's changed. It's grown piece by piece.
Yeah, I learned this personally. I wasn't around for the days when you could mine Bitcoin with a laptop. I wish I was, because I might not be here. I might be in the Bahamas somewhere
I would not.
In a mansion, but I have done some. And I won't talk about the project, right? A big thing we don't want to do here is we try not to show. I did see a comment in there saying the weekly meeting of shills. I want to stress, nothing we say here you guys should go and buy. Nothing we say here we want to pump. Mm-hmm. We don't want to pump and dump. Nothing. We're just talking about the space. But one of the projects I was in, which I shall not name, was to mine new variants of CryptoPunks. So like a mineable version of punks, which I thought was so clever. But I learned really quickly that as the difficulty of mining goes up, my laptop just couldn't cut it. And that's all I have, right? But same thing with Bitcoin. The brilliant thing about the way Satoshi, I mean, it still blows me away that after all these years, that kind of original vision that Satoshi had, he accounted for all of these things. He knew that there had to be an incentive to keep the network up. He knew that the difficulty had to increase, that the rewards had to shrink. He thought of all these things way, way before we ever realized how brilliant they were. And if it didn't work, we would know, because Bitcoin wouldn't still be here. The miners wouldn't still be mining it. We wouldn't be transacting over it. Maybe the whole crypto space would have just imploded and fallen in on itself. But instead, it's quite the opposite. And as much as people might call Bitcoin a bit of a dinosaur, it really nailed some things right and kind of set the stage for all of the other coins, all the other projects, everything else that came after, right? And we're continuing to build and innovate on top of that. So surely there's better ways to do it. And I know there's that you made me think of the big topic, Tom, proof of work versus proof of stake and the environmental impact. And I'll be the first to say I'm a big proponent of finding more efficient ways to sustain a decentralized apparatus. But do you think that there's risks that come with that? Do you think that proof of stake, is there really a big discernible difference? When I say proof of stake, maybe we should clarify a little bit, right? Proof of stake is something like Cosmos, right? Atom, the Atom token, right? You can stake that in basically any project. You could go to Coinbase, you could go to Binance, and you can do what they call staking, which is offering up your tokens to help the validators perform their tasks, to help run the chain. And you're rewarded for that. Alternatively, you have proof of work, which is like Bitcoin, Litecoin, Dogecoin, where you need to have a miner, typically like a big hardware miner. I think you can maybe do it in the cloud, but probably a hardware miner that costs a good chunk of money, that does these calculations to complete the transaction. And the calculations are very complex, which is why your laptop can't do it. There is a level of difficulty that increases over time. And so that's the...
Well, if I can jump in there, Poppy, I think you make a really good point about how Satoshi, Mr. Nakamoto, was able to almost predict the future, right? Everything that Bitcoin's going through and all the challenges it's faced has kind of come to be, right? And I think that it speaks to the prescience of his vision to go with a proof of work model, right? Because there are problems with a proof of stake model. And just to kind of distance what I'm about to say a little bit, is this is my own personal opinion, right? This is what I see happening with respect to POW versus POS, proof of work versus proof of stake, and that is it kind of going to proof of stake. Those models kind of go away from that true democratization, that true accessibility, right?
100%.
Yes, right? Because what it brings us into is more of the world that we're actually trying to disrupt, the traditional financial world, where the thing that gives you the advantage is not your ability or your merit, or maybe in the case of mining, your cleverness in being able to set up an efficient mining rig to be able to turn a profit, which is no easy feat on its own, right? Anyway, it is basically the proof of stake world says the biggest bags, the biggest holders of a certain asset start to become the more influential members of that decentralized network by definition. But the problem there is, I think it only grows bigger. For example, with the ETH 2.0, right? As much as I'm a fan of it, I do have reservations about the proof of stake model, because what it's going to basically incentivize is for the biggest bags to just go stake, right? And in doing that, all they will do is continue to grow that huge bag. And that's a head start that can be untouchable in some cases. So mathematically,
Literally, mathematically untouchable. Like, I'll go ahead. I'm just going to smash it. I'll just say it. It can make people mad. I'm in many ways a Bitcoin maxi, not the definition that many people think of, but I like to think of it as a decentralized proof of work maxi. So I support many things, but the core of it is that decentralized core of proof of work. So to address kind of the energy concern brought up by Poppy, and for everyone, this is an argument we're hearing a lot now, and typical to media, it's a bunch of gibberish. So ask yourselves, do you like laundry? Is laundry good? Right? This might sound crazy. Is laundry destroying the environment? Well, the answer is like, we like laundry, but it's not destroying the environment. That's not the main issue. Bitcoin mining takes about as much energy every year as laundry, just globally. Neither of those are a threat to the world's, environmental concern. If we extrapolate it out, hundreds of years, thousands of years, we can get to that argument. But at the moment, it is just pure FUD. It's just not a real thing. Any industry takes up more energy.
That's a really good stat there, Tom. I wasn't aware of that, actually, that laundry is equivalent in energy expenditure to Bitcoin mining activities. That's a good stat, sir.
I do a lot of laundry.
Well, I have a high efficiency washer, so I feel like I'm good there.
Good, yeah. You're saving the world. And I love the environment. I'm very pro environment. It's just such an obviously transparent gibberish argument that we've been thrown, and it's been repeated over and over again, and it makes sense because it's pure energy. Bitcoin is thermodynamically secured money. It's like power at a scientific level is the juice. So I can understand why that would make sense, but it's just not reality. We look at proof of stake and it sounds so great, right? It's, we don't have to use all this energy. What we're doing is we're giving up that thermodynamic protection that secures the proof of work system. Proof of stake system, just think of it, visualize in your head. If owning a coin is how new coins are created, where does the first coin come from? How can that have a fair origin if owning a coin is the way you get more, and we're talking about just through the mining or validation system? It can't be decentralized because someone at some point had to create the first coin. And then by a mathematical definition, they're ahead of the curve of everyone else because they're able to collect more coins before anyone else is even able to have them.
Actually, I just love how you describe that thermodynamically backed coin.
Secured,
yes. What's very interesting is over 100 years ago, and you guys might have heard of this guy, Henry Ford. Yes, the man that founded Ford Motors, perhaps the largest or one of the largest automakers in history. He predicted that eventually an energy-backed currency would dominate society. And you got to give the guy credit. He was very forward-thinking. He was an innovator of his time. And that's exactly what Bitcoin is. It is an energy-backed currency. The thermodynamic sounds way sexier. I like that, Tom. I'm going to start using that myself.
Yeah, forward thinking, you could say, right? No, I just had to make that joke.
Wah, wah, wah.
Can we edit that one out, please?
Yes, please. Yes.
So, yeah, you know what? One of the things they talk about with Bitcoin is that, okay, it can't be cracked today. But what if one day there's a quantum computer that can crack it? I don't know when that day comes, but when we get to the day where quantum computers are a real thing, meaningful thing, I should say, I think we're in the early stages of them. A meaningful thing, they can really crack it, then this is going to be an exciting time to live. But that's how secure people consider the Bitcoin blockchain, that it will take a technology that doesn't even really meaningfully exist at this point in time to try to maybe hack it. And that's assuming that by that point in time, we also don't have protections against a quantum.
And we already do.
Right, exactly. And we already have a pathway to address that. It's the hard fork. It is just developing a quantum hardened solution into the algorithm, right? And sure, it's going to cause, some network, maybe transition issues. Certainly there's going to be some issues in that transition phase. But, this whole quantum thing, I think, is FUD just as much as the energy consumption narrative is FUD, right?
Absolutely.
And it's all about just being mindful and being critical about the information you're receiving and how you process it. Just think, how can I debunk this perhaps, right? And that quantum thing is real, but I mean, there's already a pathway to secure against it. for example, if we're going to be talking about future technologies that could potentially be a problem for Bitcoin, then why don't we talk about future technologies that could solve the energy issue, right? Let's go turn on new energy sources, right? And make it so that energy consumption isn't harmful to the environment. Like, why is that not the narrative, right?
Bitcoin, mark my words, the least successful statement ever. Bitcoin will be the driver for innovative energy solutions, period. We have made a global market for energy that is fungible literally anywhere. You can be anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in a jurisdiction. You don't need permission. You can, if you have energy and you have access to the internet, you can create this value through mining. It will be the biggest pusher of, I am just going to throw out fusion, maybe, whatever it is that we move to, it's going to drive it. And I think maybe we're even seeing that. We're seeing oil, we're seeing fossil fuels dependency in the world drop over the last decade. And it just happens to line up with where Bitcoin started.
And just one last thing on that, Tom. Just to your point, it's already happening.
That's the beauty.
I am in conversations with some folks that are, well, let's leave it at, they are involved with these big energy companies in the US, and they are, more than one of these companies are exploring, waste energy recapture, for example, off their flares. They have to burn off, for example, excess gas and stuff, capturing that energy and turning it into electricity to mine Bitcoin. So these old industries that are really part of the problem are the ones actually being actively, kind of pioneering this new energy paradigm, which is super interesting. So to your point, Tom, it's already happening, man.
It's funny how common that is when it comes to Bitcoin, right? It's like we propose these things and it's like it's actually already happening. Like quantum encryption already exists. It's way easier to build a defense against quantum computing than it is to build a quantum computer capable of an attack. And so I think that scaling, and this is just my opinion, but that scaling is going to continue. The next thing after quantum or whatever, it's always going to be easier to defend with encryption than it will be to break encryption. And I think that that's going to maybe guarantee Bitcoin's success in that field specifically, kind of indefinitely.
And that all goes back to what Satoshi built into this, which is if you incentivize people to maintain that network, they will do things like proactively seek more cost-efficient energy sources. I know there's projects I follow that are doing the same thing. They're not looking for green sources because they feel good about it. I'm sure some do, right? They're looking at green sources because they're more efficient than whatever they were using before. Money is perhaps one of the greatest incentives to a human. We're just kind of innately drawn to it for whatever reason, right? Good, bad, and different. It's a great incentivizer. And in this case, there is a lot of incentive to find a more cost-effective solution. If it's solar, if it's water, if it's wind, whatever it might be. If you find a kind of renewable source, you're going to make more money. So I know we've spent a lot of time, one, talking about Bitcoin, and two, talking about decentralization. And I want to just emphasize the reason we talk about Bitcoin so much is not because we're all Bitcoin maxis. Some of us are, but because it's still driving the market, because it is the foundation of the market. And Bitcoin success is all of the market success. And you guys see this when Bitcoin spends 3.5 months on a downtrend. Well, what's the rest of the market do? It spends 3.5 months on a downtrend. And before we get into the next topic of centralization, and then I think following that, we're going to get into the Q&A, I want to talk about very briefly, because I think it's worthwhile. People might be sitting there like, why is my coin going down if Bitcoin's going down? And I think a lot of that is really just boils down to two reasons. One, when crypto was founded, there weren't nearly so many coins, and everything was traded in Bitcoin pairs. But people really wanted to build up those bags of Satoshis, which is just the smaller unit of Bitcoins. They wanted to increase their Bitcoin holdings. So it's always about that kind of optimizing your value between altcoins and Bitcoin, right? You might move into an altcoin to increase the value of your Bitcoin and then move back into Bitcoin once you've increased that value, right? But the other...
I do that to this day, puppy.
that's the number one thing you taught me. And I think, when I first met Tom Crown, I was a complete novice, right? But Tom told me, Poppy, you need to maximize your sats. And I think that's good advice, because Bitcoin is still the king of the space, right? It might be kind of slow, might be kind of a grandpa in the space, might not be very sexy, but it's still at the top of the food chain. The second part is that Bitcoin, because it's the largest, it has the most interest. It also has what they call the most liquidity, meaning the most people are interested in buying and selling it. So if you're someone that has, say, $200 million that you want to invest, it's a lot easier to do that in Bitcoin than it is to do it in other coins, right? So that's why you see some of this, the larger market, the people with a lot of money are going to follow Bitcoin. And so the market just generally, for those reasons and other reasons, is going to follow Bitcoin up and down, right? But that's kind of a sidebar. So the next topic I wanted to talk about, and then the Q&A, is the advantages. We talked a lot about decentralization, and there are a lot of advantages of decentralization, but I'm going to play devil's advocate, and some of the guys on the call, you might not like this, but I think there are some positives to centralization. And to me personally, I think that the future of crypto is going to have to find a happy medium between centralization and decentralization. We're not just talking technically, but also how the projects are managed. A lot of projects, if you go truly decentralized and fully democratized, that can be a big risk, because what if, say, a couple of whales come in, they gain a large enough share of that decentralized voting power to drive the project in a bad direction, right? So the first thing I'm going to bring up in terms of advantages of centralization is insurability. So one thing you can do now, if you invest in a bank, now sure, the banks are not going to give you rates on your investments that are even close to crypto, even stable coins. They're just not. Their businesses, at the end of the day, they want to make money. But your government, most likely, if you're listening to this, most governments will insure banks up to a certain amount for any losses. And this is to prevent things like the United States had a Great Depression, 100 years ago. And part of that was that there was a lack of insurance on your funds. So everyone was scared they were going to lose their money. They try to draw the money out of the bank. The bank doesn't have enough money, and you can see what happens. It's a calamity, right? So that's something that is lacking today in crypto. Some exchanges may offer some limited protection of your funds, but not all of them, and not to a real great extent. So there is a risk there, right? So that is one advantage that centralized services do offer. Now I'm going to toss this out. I don't want to dominate this section. What do you guys think are some other advantages of centralized services if we're going to play devil's advocate, right? I think it's fair to look at both sides of this.
Well, I have something to say about this. One key thing that I really enjoy about centralized services is that generally they have a lot better information about how to use their service. So as a beginner, it's often a lot easier to get to grips with the software, and it's a lot easier to move about, and just everything is generally got more thought into it because they're looking at it from a beginner's perspective. So for the decentralized platforms, oftentimes I found, just like name a project, Lena, trying to use their UI and their website is incredibly hard because they're coming from the mindset of a developer or somebody that has deep technical knowledge. But centralized services, they often think from a beginner's point of view. So it's a lot easier to use and connect to. Another thing I like is the support. One big problem about crypto is that, you have to ask other people how to find the answer to this problem. When you have a centralized service, you don't need to go around asking a million different people and you get mixed questions. They'll simply tell you if they have the answer to it, and they'll help you out as much as they can. So it's a lot nicer experience, especially if you're a beginner.
Absolutely. As I said, I'm a maxi of many sorts earlier. I can even admit not everything needs to be decentralized. I think there are many things that are very important that they become decentralized, like the monetary system, in my opinion. But I don't need I don't know, random saved games from my Zelda 64 as a kid. It's like not everything has to be on a blockchain. And we're in this period of exploration of where does decentralization fit in? We haven't really had this in existence before. And we're seeing it kind of creep into every asset or every aspect of our lives. And in reality, that's just not going to fly forever. We're going to find out where it's valuable and where it isn't. And where it isn't, it's not going to thrive. It goes back to the efficiency quota. Being decentralized is, by definition, inefficient. Centralized chains and such are way more efficient because you only need one central record keeper or decision maker. And so when we do decentralize, we trade off efficiency for it. We're going to figure out what is valuable to decentralize and what isn't. I think you made a good point, Oz. That's a really visible way of describing it is, I where's my customer support ticket to Bitcoin? They never answer. That's the worst customer support ever. Unfortunately, the exchanges aren't that much better at the moment, but that's exactly it. There's somewhere to go. Whereas a decentralized system, we don't have anyone to go to.
And you make a really good point there, Tom, about the support structure. There's nobody to yell at on the phone when something goes bad with fully decentralized systems. But therein lies kind of some of that benefit of centralization, right? So I think that highlights kind of just where we are currently with DAOs, right? With the decentralized autonomous organization trend, or we should really call it this new paradigm, in my opinion, this new paradigm of how humans organize and collaborate. I think, we see there are a lot of challenges in trying to pull off a hard and fast DAO that can be truly, fully autonomous. There are a lot of pitfalls. There are a lot of projects out there right now that are kind of walking it back. They tried to go down that road to go full DAO, and they realized that just everything you're mentioning, Tom, right? It is slower. It is more chaotic. There's more complexity in how these humans are interacting, right? And so for the sake of, say, integrity of, I think Poppy mentioned, a roadmap's integrity, right? Making sure that different milestones get hit on time, right? Maybe there is a need for a little bit of centralization up to a certain point, right? Up to a certain maturity level. So, in my head, I think the way we're going to start to see this decentralization versus centralization balance that you're speaking to there, Tom, we're going to hit that, I think, in a bit of a push and pull, right? It's everything, for example, that's built on the Ethereum network, right? That's built on a fully decentralized network. You benefit from all the censorship resistance, security, what have you, all those benefits of being purely decentralized. You're going to start to see these different projects build on top, but those projects will most likely have some form of centralization. And that's because in those early days, and make no mistake, we're in those early days now, right? In these early days, you do need to have that efficiency. You do need the ability to scale and to be able to basically accomplish a roadmap to be successful, right? And at some point down the line, when that maturity level is there, there's enough engagement, you start transitioning to a fully decentralized and autonomous model. But I think right now it's just there are so many challenges in going full DAO right now, and I think that speaks to some of the benefits of being centralized.
Absolutely. Guys, I think we should wrap up the podcast and move to the Q&A. I think everyone loves the Q&A more anyway, let's be real. So this has been some great topics, though. I will say we had all these things lined up and we really ended up just kind of vibing on topics, and it is getting better every episode. Well done, everybody.
Yeah, I agree. This is more fun every time we do it.
Yeah. Also, thank you, Bulls. While we were talking, we're getting some pampage. Well done.
Ooh.
Yeah, pampage.
I just see this. over 42K.
Over
I know this isn't going to
42,000.
age well for it. 100K next week. Remember what did I say at the beginning of the call, guys? I said, hey, if you got $1 billion, go buy Bitcoin.
Maybe they did.
Whoever did that, if that's Elon, sir, I'm going to go buy a Tesla now.
It's because Mr. Mister loves him so much.
Just for the record,
True.
guys, I just want to put out there, I did not choose that nickname. That was given to me. I am I will refrain from making comment on that nickname.
All right. I still love you, Elon.